The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Kandahar as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his tactical vest one final time. The familiar weight of his gear felt heavier today, though he couldn't explain why. Something in the air felt different, charged with an electricity that made the hair on his arms stand up. His unit had been deployed to this forward operating base for 6 months now, and Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts. Today, those instincts were screaming. The mission briefing had been routine enough. His squad was tasked with escorting a medical convoy to a remote village clinic, approximately 15 kilometers outside the base perimeter. The area had been quiet for weeks, with local intelligence reporting no significant Taliban activity.
Kvachata allowed that journey to seek an exotive by...
But Rodriguez knew better than to trust the calm. In his 8 years of military service, he had learned that the quiet moments often preceded the storm.
This is commerce.
Dr. Sarah Chen finished loading the last of the medical supplies into the armored transport vehicle. At 28, she had already served 2 tours as a Navy nurse, but this deployment felt different. The work here was more challenging, more immediate. Every day brought wounded soldiers and injured civilians who needed care that could mean the difference between life and death.
She had volunteered for this convoy specifically because the village clinic they were visiting had been without proper medical attention for over a month.
Sarah had grown up in a military family. Her father had served in Vietnam, her older brother in Iraq, and now here she was, continuing the tradition of service.
That day how?
But unlike her male relatives, she had chosen to serve by healing rather than fighting.
Her medical bag contained everything from basic first aid supplies to advanced surgical instruments.
She had learned to perform miracles with limited resources, and the soldiers respected her for it. Rodriguez watched as Dr. Chen secured her equipment. He had worked with her before and had developed a deep respect for her dedication and skill. Last month, she had saved the life of Private Johnson after an IED explosion had nearly taken his leg. Her steady hands and calm demeanor under pressure had impressed even the most hardened veterans in his unit. Today, she would be his responsibility to protect. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles, a lead Humvee with Rodriguez's security team, the medical transport carrying Dr. Chen and her supplies, and a trailing vehicle with additional security. The route had been cleared by advanced scouts, and air support was on standby if needed. Standard procedure for what should have been a routine mission. As they departed the base, Rodriguez felt the familiar tension that came with leaving the relative safety of the compound.
The landscape outside was deceptively beautiful, with rolling hills and scattered settlements that looked peaceful from a distance.
But he knew that behind any rock, around any corner, danger could be waiting.
His eyes constantly scanned the horizon, looking for anything out of place.
Dr. Chen sat in the medical transport reviewing her notes about the patients she expected to treat at the village clinic. Intelligence reports indicated they would be dealing primarily with malnutrition, basic infections, and injuries from improvised explosive devices that had been detonated weeks earlier. She had packed accordingly, bringing antibiotics, surgical supplies, and nutrition supplements that could make an immediate difference in the lives of the villagers. The first hour of the journey passed without incident. The convoy maintained radio contact with base operations, reporting their position every 15 minutes as protocol required. Rodriguez allowed himself to relax slightly as they approached the halfway point. The road ahead appeared clear, with no signs of recent disturbance or suspicious activity, but appearances could be deceiving. Hidden in a cluster of rocks approximately 200 meters from the road, Mahmoud Hassan adjusted his position and checked his watch. The ambush had been planned for weeks, with intelligence gathered from sympathizers in the village who had reported the scheduled medical convoy. Hassan commanded a cell of 12 fighters, all experienced in guerrilla tactics and motivated by a combination of religious fervor and personal grievances against the American occupation.
The plan was simple but effective.
They would allow the convoy to enter a natural choke point between 2 hills, then attack from elevated positions on both sides.
The lead and trailing vehicles would be targeted first, with rocket-propelled grenades, trapping the medical transport in the middle.
It was a tactic they had used successfully before, and Hassan was confident in his team's ability to execute it flawlessly. As the convoy approached the predetermined ambush site, Hassan raised his radio and whispered the code word that would initiate the attack. His fighters had been in position since before dawn, camouflaged among the rocks and vegetation. They had clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes planned. Everything was ready. Rodriguez felt his stomach clench as they entered the narrow passage between the hills. This was exactly the kind of terrain that made convoy commanders nervous. Limited visibility, restricted maneuverability, and plenty of cover for potential attackers. He switched his radio to the tactical frequency and alerted his team to maintain heightened awareness. The first rocket-propelled grenade struck the lead Humvee without warning. The explosion was deafening, and Rodriguez felt the shockwave even from his position in the second vehicle. The lead Humvee lurched to one side, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. Before he could process what was happening, a second explosion rocked the trailing vehicle. They were trapped, exactly as Hassan had planned. "Contact! Contact! We're taking fire from both sides!" Rodriguez shouted into his radio as automatic weapons fire began raining down on the convoy. The distinctive crack of AK-47s echoed off the hillsides, and he could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions. Dr. Chen was thrown against the side of the medical transport as the driver swerved to avoid the incoming fire. Medical supplies scattered across the floor of the vehicle, and she could hear the terrifying sound of bullets striking the armored plating. Her training kicked in immediately, and she began securing the more dangerous medical supplies that could become projectiles if the vehicle was hit directly. Rodriguez's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The lead vehicle was disabled but still providing some cover for his position. The trailing vehicle appeared to be in similar condition, with smoke visible but the crew still returning fire. His immediate priority was protecting Dr. Chen and the medical supplies, but he also needed to coordinate a defense that would allow them to either fight their way out or call for reinforcement. The medical transport driver, Corporal Williams, had taken cover behind the engine block and was returning fire with his M4 carbine. But their position was exposed and the attackers had both the high ground and superior numbers. Rodriguez knew they needed to find better cover quickly, or the situation would become hopeless. "Dr. Chen, we need to move!" Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. "The transport is too exposed here. We need to get to that cluster of rocks on the left." Sarah looked where he was pointing and saw a formation of large boulders about 50 meters away. "What's the time he came to?" "That's 98%. It would provide better cover, but getting there would mean crossing open ground while under fire."
She quickly grabbed her medical bag and the most essential supplies she could carry.
"I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Rodriguez coordinated with his team using hand signals, establishing a covering fire pattern that would suppress the attackers long enough for them to move. The plan was risky, but staying in their current position was certain death. On his signal, his soldiers would lay down suppressive fire while he and Dr. Chen made their dash to cover. Hassan watched the convoy's desperate attempts to establish a defensive position. His fighters had performed well, disabling 2 of the 3 vehicles and pinning down the survivors. But he knew that American reinforcements would eventually arrive, and his window of opportunity was limited. He needed to finish this quickly. He signaled for his team to intensify their fire and prepare for a final assault. 2 of his fighters began moving down the hillside to flank the Americans' position. If they could get close enough, they could use grenades to eliminate the remaining resistance. Rodriguez saw the movement on the hillside and realized their situation was about to get much worse. The attackers were preparing to overrun their position and he had only seconds to act. He looked at Dr. Chen, who was crouched beside him with her medical bag clutched tightly to her chest. "When I say go, you run straight for those rocks and don't look back," he told her. "I'll be right behind you." But as Rodriguez prepared to give the signal, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. One of the attacking fighters had worked his way around to their flank and was preparing to throw a grenade directly into their position. There was no time to warn anyone, no time to take cover. Without thinking, Rodriguez threw himself toward Dr. Chen just as the grenade left the attacker's hand. The explosive device arced through the air, and Rodriguez knew with terrible certainty that it would land directly where they were taking cover. "Get low!" he screamed, pushing Dr. Chen down behind the rocks as the grenade clattered across the ground toward them. Sarah felt Rodriguez's weight pressing her down just as the world exploded around them. The concussion from the grenade blast was overwhelming, and she felt debris raining down on their position. Her ears were ringing and she tasted blood in her mouth. But she was alive and she could feel Rodriguez moving beside her. When she looked up, she saw why she had survived. Rodriguez had positioned himself between her and the explosion, using his own body as a shield. His tactical vest had absorbed much of the shrapnel, but she could see blood seeping through tears in the fabric. He had been wounded protecting her. "Rodriguez, talk to me," she said, immediately switching into her medical training mode.
"I'm okay," he replied, though his voice was strained. "Just some shrapnel. How are you?"
Sarah quickly examined him and found multiple small wounds where fragments had penetrated his protective gear. None appeared immediately life-threatening, but he was losing blood and would need proper treatment soon. More importantly, she realized that his selfless action had saved her life. The firefight continued around them, but the intensity had decreased. Rodriguez's team was still returning fire, and the attackers seemed to be reassessing their strategy. Hassan's quick assault had failed, and now he was faced with a prolonged engagement that would inevitably draw American reinforcements.
Rodriguez managed to get back into position and continued directing his team's defense despite his injuries. He had called for immediate backup and medical evacuation, but he knew it would take time for help to arrive.
They needed to hold their position and keep Dr. Chen safe until reinforcements could reach them. Dr. Chen worked quickly to treat Rodriguez's wounds while staying low to avoid the continuing gunfire. She used supplies from her medical bag to stop the bleeding and stabilize his condition. As she worked, she marveled at his courage. He had risked his life without hesitation to protect her, and she was determined to ensure that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Hassan realized that his ambush was failing. The Americans had established a strong defensive position and were effectively returning fire. His two flanking fighters had been unable to get close enough to use their grenades effectively, and he was starting to take casualties. He needed to either commit to a full assault or withdraw before reinforcements arrived. As Rodriguez coordinated his team's defense, he couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation.
He had spent his entire military career training to protect others, but today it was a Navy nurse who was keeping him alive.
Chen's skilled treatment of his wounds had allowed him to continue fighting, and her presence gave him additional motivation to ensure they all survived. The sound of approaching helicopters in the distance brought hope to the embattled convoy.
Rodriguez's call for backup had been received, and help was on the way. But he knew that the next few minutes would be critical.
The attackers would either make a final, desperate assault or attempt to withdraw before the reinforcements arrived. Hassan heard the helicopters too, and he knew his time was running out. He made the decision to withdraw, signaling his fighters to begin their retreat. The ambush had failed to achieve its objectives, but his team had survived to fight another day. As they melted away into the rocky terrain, he couldn't help but feel frustrated by the missed opportunity. As the immediate threat receded, Dr. Chen continued treating Rodriguez's wounds while also checking on the other members of the convoy. Several soldiers had been injured in the initial attack, and she worked tirelessly to stabilize them before the medical evacuation helicopters arrived. Rodriguez watched her work and felt a profound respect for her dedication.
In the middle of a combat zone, under fire and in danger, she had maintained her focus on helping others.
Her courage was different from his, but no less real. She had chosen to serve by healing, and today she had proven that such service was just as valuable as any warrior's contribution. The helicopters arrived within minutes, bringing both medical evacuation capabilities and additional security forces. As Rodriguez was loaded onto a stretcher for transport to the field hospital, he made sure that Dr. Chapez said he would.
Chen was recognized for her actions during the ambush. Her quick thinking and skilled treatment had not only saved his life, but had also enabled him to continue protecting the convoy until help arrived.
Sarah rode with Rodriguez in the medical evacuation helicopter, continuing to monitor his condition during the flight to the field hospital.
As they lifted off from the ambush site, she could see the damaged convoy vehicles below and realized how close they had all come to death.
Rodriguez's willingness to shield her from the grenade had been the turning point that allowed them all to survive. But neither of them realized that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. Rodriguez's actions that day would soon set in motion a chain of events that would involve an entire battalion of Marines and demonstrate the true meaning of military brotherhood and honor. The field hospital at Forward Operating Base Chapman buzzed with controlled urgency as the medical evacuation helicopters touched down on the landing pad.
Dr. Site. Sarah Chen had already begun preparing for the incoming casualties during the flight, coordinating with the surgical team via radio to ensure that operating rooms would be ready upon arrival. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was conscious but had lost a significant amount of blood from his shrapnel wounds.
Colonel James Mitchell, the base commander, was waiting at the landing pad when the helicopters arrived. News of the convoy ambush had reached him within minutes of the initial attack, and he had been monitoring the situation closely.
The fact that they had managed to fight off the attackers and extract all personnel alive was remarkable, but the details of exactly how they had survived were only beginning to emerge. As Rodriguez was wheeled into the emergency treatment area, he insisted on giving his after-action report immediately, despite the medical team's protests that it could wait until after his surgery.
Colonel Mitchell recognized the urgency in the wounded Marine's voice and allowed him to speak while the doctors prepared him for the operating room.
"Sir, Dr. Chen saved us all," Rodriguez said, his voice weak but determined.
"When that grenade came in, she didn't just take cover. After I got hit, she treated my wounds under fire and kept me functional enough to coordinate our defense.
Without her, we would have lost that position and probably our lives."
Doctor!
Chen tried to deflect the praise as she assisted with Rodriguez's preparation for surgery.
Staff Sergeant Rodriguez threw himself between me and that explosion, Colonel.
He used his own body as a shield to protect me? I was just doing my job treating his injuries. Colonel Mitchell listened to both accounts and quickly realized that something extraordinary had occurred during the ambush. The mutual protection and support between these two service members represented the best traditions of military service.
About 100,000 people are convincing that protesters have been breaching the peace of military services.
But as he reviewed the incident reports over the following hours, he began to understand that the story was even more significant than he had initially realized. The ambush had been more sophisticated than typical Taliban attacks in the region. Intelligence analysts determined that it had been planned specifically to target medical convoys, with the goal of disrupting American humanitarian efforts in the area. The attackers had demonstrated detailed knowledge of convoy procedures and timing, suggesting the involvement of experienced fighters with access to inside information.
Rodriguez's successful defense of the convoy, despite being wounded, had not only saved lives, but it also prevented a significant propaganda victory for the enemy. The capture or killing of American medical personnel would have been used to discourage local cooperation with coalition forces and to demonstrate Taliban strength in the region.
As word of the incident spread through the base, other soldiers began sharing their own stories about both Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. Rodriguez was known throughout the battalion as a Marine's Marine, someone who always put his men first and never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself.
His decision to shield Dr. Jeffersack is not there.
Chen from the grenade was entirely consistent with his character and his commitment to protecting others. Dr. Koss. Chen had earned similar respect for her medical skills and her willingness to serve in dangerous conditions. She had volunteered for multiple convoy missions, often insisting on personally delivering medical care to remote areas where other medical personnel were reluctant to go.
Those are perhaps expecting domestic connections about typo privacies.
Her courage under fire during the ambush had impressed even the most seasoned combat veterans. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the battalion's intelligence officer and coincidentally Rodriguez's younger sister, was among the first to hear the detailed account of the ambush. She had been tracking her brother's convoy throughout the mission and had coordinated the response when the attack began.
The news that he had been wounded while protecting Dr. Side.
Chen brought tears to her eyes, but also a fierce pride in his actions. Lisa immediately began working to ensure that both her brother and Dr. Chen received appropriate recognition for their heroism. She documented their actions during the ambush and began the paperwork necessary to recommend them for military honors. But more importantly, she started making phone calls to other members of Rodriguez's unit who were currently deployed at different bases throughout the region. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had served with dozens of Marines during his 8-year career, and many of them were still on active duty. The news of his heroic actions and his injuries spread through the military communication network with remarkable speed. Within hours of the ambush, Marines at bases throughout Afghanistan and Iraq were learning about what had happened to their former squad leader and friend.
Sergeant Major William Torres received the news while conducting training exercises at Camp Leatherneck, approximately 200 kilometers from Fob Chapman. Torres had served under Rodriguez during his first deployment and had learned much of what he knew about leadership from the man he still considered his mentor. When he heard that Rodriguez had been wounded protecting a Navy nurse, his first instinct was to find a way to help. Torres began making calls to other Marines who had served with Rodriguez, sharing the news and discussing possible ways to support their wounded comrade.
What started as informal conversations among friends quickly evolved into something much more organized. These Marines had been scattered across multiple units and deployments, but their loyalty to Rodriguez and their respect for his service created a powerful bond that transcended normal military channels.
Private First Class Danny Kim was serving with a reconnaissance unit near the Pakistani border when he received word about the ambush.
Kim had been a troubled young Marine when Rodriguez first took him under his wing 3 years earlier. Rodriguez had spent countless hours mentoring Kim, helping him develop the discipline and confidence he needed to succeed in the military. The news that his former squad leader had been wounded hit Kim like a physical blow. Kim immediately requested permission to visit Rodriguez at the field hospital, but his commanding officer explained that FOB Chapman was too far away and that such personal visits were not authorized during active operations. Frustrated but not deterred, Kim began exploring other ways he could show his support for the man who had changed his life. Similar conversations were taking place at military bases throughout the region. Marines who had served with Rodriguez were learning about his actions during the ambush and were looking for ways to honor his sacrifice. The story of how he had protected Dr. Nessel's Chen and how she had then worked to save his life resonated deeply with service members who understood the importance of mutual support and protection in combat situations. Master Sergeant Robert Jackson was coordinating supply convoys from a logistics base when he heard about Rodriguez's situation. Jackson had been Rodriguez's platoon sergeant during a particularly difficult deployment 2 years earlier, and the two men had developed a close friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. Jackson knew that Rodriguez would never ask for help, but he also knew that his friend deserved all the support the Marine Corps could provide. Jackson began working through official channels to organize a support effort for Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. He contacted the base chaplain, the medical staff, and even the public affairs office to explore ways that the Marine Corps could recognize their heroism and provide them with the resources they needed for recovery. But the most significant response was beginning to develop among the enlisted Marines who had served directly under Rodriguez's command. These men and women had experienced his leadership firsthand and understood exactly what kind of person would throw himself between a grenade and a Navy nurse without hesitation. They were not content to simply file reports and send letters of support. Corporal Maria Santos was serving with an artillery unit when she learned about the ambush. Santos had been a struggling young Marine when Rodriguez had taken over her squad, and his patient mentoring had helped her develop into a confident and capable soldier. Why did she want the society to see this a chapter? She immediately began organizing her unit to contribute to a care package fund for Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. But Santos and her fellow Marines wanted to do more than just send supplies. They began discussing the possibility of requesting transfers to FOB Chapman, where they could provide direct support to their wounded leader. The idea was ambitious and would require approval from multiple levels of command, but their determination was unwavering. Lieutenant Colonel David Ramirez commanded a battalion of Marines stationed at a forward operating base about 150 kilometers from Chapman. When he heard about Rodriguez's actions during the ambush, he immediately recognized the significance of what had occurred.
Rodriguez represented the best values of Marine Corps leadership, and his willingness to protect Dr.
Chen demonstrated the kind of joint service cooperation that was essential to mission success in Afghanistan. Ramirez began exploring ways that his battalion could provide support to Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. He contacted Colonel Mitchell directly to offer assistance with medical care, security, and logistics support. But as he discussed the situation with his staff officers, a more ambitious idea began to take shape. The Marines under Ramirez's command included several dozen who had served with Rodriguez at various points in their careers. These Marines were requesting permission to visit their wounded leader, and their requests were becoming increasingly difficult to deny. Ramirez began to consider the possibility of organizing a formal delegation to FOB Chapman that would allow these Marines to show their support while also demonstrating the Marine Corps' commitment to taking care of its own. Dr. Chen was unaware of the growing response to her actions during the ambush. She was focused entirely on Rodriguez's medical care and on treating the other wounded Marines from the convoy. The shrapnel wounds were healing well, but Rodriguez had developed a minor infection that was complicating his recovery. She spent long hours at his bedside, monitoring his condition and adjusting his treatment as needed. Rodriguez was similarly focused on his recovery and on ensuring that the lessons learned from the ambush were properly documented and shared with other units. He worked with intelligence officers to provide detailed information about the attackers' tactics and equipment,
hoping to prevent future ambushes from being as successful.
But both Rodriguez and Dr. Chen were beginning to notice increased attention from other personnel on the base. Marines they had never met were stopping by the medical facility to check on Rodriguez's condition and to express their gratitude for his service.
Dr. Robbins.
Chen was receiving similar attention, with soldiers and Marines praising her courage during the ambush. Colonel Mitchell was receiving an unprecedented number of communications from Marine units throughout the region. Requests for information about Rodriguez's condition, offers of support, and applications for transfer were flooding his administrative offices. The response was far beyond anything he had seen in his 25 years of military service. The colonel began to realize that Rodriguez's actions during the ambush had touched something deeper than simple professional respect. The Marines responding to his situation saw in him a reflection of their own values and aspirations. Rodriguez represented the kind of leader they hoped to become, and his willingness to sacrifice himself for Dr. Chen embodied the selfless service that defined the Marine Corps. Mitchell made the decision to support the growing effort to honor Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. He authorized extended visiting privileges for Marines who wished to pay their respects, and he began working with higher command to develop a formal recognition ceremony that would acknowledge their heroism. But the most significant development was still building momentum at bases throughout the region. Marine commanders were beginning to coordinate their individual support efforts into a larger, unified response. What had started as personal loyalty to a respected leader was evolving into a demonstration of Marine Corps values that would soon involve hundreds of service members. The communication network that was spreading news of Rodriguez's heroism was the same network that had always connected Marines across different units and deployments. These informal relationships, built through shared service and mutual respect, created bonds that transcended official military structures. When one Marine was in need, others responded without question or hesitation. Sergeant Major Torres had been coordinating with other senior enlisted Marines throughout the region, and their conversations had revealed a remarkable consensus. Every Marine who had served with Rodriguez wanted to find a way to show their support, and many were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to do so. Torres made a decision that would change everything. He contacted Colonel Mitchell directly and requested permission to organize a formal delegation of Marines to visit Rodriguez at FOB Chapman. The delegation would include representatives from every unit that had served with Rodriguez, and it would demonstrate the Marine Corps' commitment to honoring exceptional service. Colonel Mitchell was initially skeptical about the feasibility of such an effort. Coordinating the movement of Marines from multiple bases during active combat operations would be extremely complex and resource-intensive. But as he considered the request, he began to understand its deeper significance.
Rodriguez's actions during the ambush had created an opportunity to demonstrate Marine Corps values in a very public way. The story of his sacrifice for Dr.
Chen and her subsequent efforts to save his life embodied the kind of joint service cooperation and mutual support that was essential to success in Afghanistan. A formal recognition ceremony could serve both to honor individual heroism and to reinforce broader military objectives.
Mitchell approved Torres's request and began working with other base commanders to coordinate the logistics of bringing together Marines from throughout the region. The operation would require careful planning and significant resources, but the potential benefits justified the effort.
Within hours of Mitchell's approval, the planning for what would become known as the Rodriguez Rally was underway. Marine units throughout Afghanistan and Iraq began preparing to send representatives to FOB Chapman.
The delegation would include Marines from Rodriguez's original training company, his first deployment unit, his current battalion, and every other unit he had served with during his 8-year career.
Dr. Chen continued to focus on Rodriguez's medical care, unaware that his heroic actions were inspiring a response that would soon bring together hundreds of Marines from across the globe. The infection was finally under control, and his wounds were healing well. She expected him to make a full recovery within a few weeks.
Rodriguez was also unaware of the growing preparations for the ceremony in his honor.
He was focused on his recovery and on preparing to return to duty as soon as possible. The idea that his actions during the ambush had inspired such a significant response would have surprised and humbled him. But the Marines who were preparing to journey to FOB Chapman understood something that neither Rodriguez nor Dr. Chen fully grasped. The convoy ambush had created more than just another after-action report and medical success story. It had demonstrated the very best of military service and had inspired a response that would show the world what it meant to be a Marine. The morning of January 15th dawned clear and cold at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Colonel Mitchell stood in his operations center, reviewing the logistics reports for what had become the largest single-day troop movement in the region's recent history. Over the past 3 days, Marine units from across Afghanistan and Iraq had been coordinating their efforts to send representatives to honor Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Dr. Sarah Chen. What had started as informal expressions of support from individual Marines had evolved into a carefully orchestrated operation involving multiple battalions and support units. The Rodriguez Rally, as it had come to be known, would bring together nearly 400 Marines from 23 different units across 2 countries.
The scale of the response had surprised even Colonel Mitchell, who had authorized the initial request from Sergeant Major Torres. Rodriguez himself remained largely unaware of the preparations taking place around him. Dr. Chen had insisted that he focus on his recovery, and the medical staff had carefully managed the flow of information to avoid overwhelming their patient. He knew that several old friends had requested permission to visit, but he had no idea of the true scope of what was being planned in his honor. The first groups had begun arriving the previous evening. Transport helicopters and military vehicles had been shuttling Marines to FOB Chapman throughout the night, and the base's temporary billeting areas were filled to capacity. The logistics of feeding, housing, and coordinating nearly 400 additional personnel had stretched the base's resources, but the staff had risen to the challenge with characteristic military efficiency.
Doused by a top-set staff.
Sergeant Major Torres had arrived with the first group, and had immediately taken charge of coordinating the various Marine contingents. His years of experience in managing large-scale operations proved invaluable as he worked to organize what was essentially a small military convention. Each unit had brought its own leadership structure and traditions, and Torres worked tirelessly to blend them into a cohesive whole. The Marines who had traveled to FOB Chapman represented a cross-section of Rodriguez's 8-year career. Some were grizzled veterans who had served with him during his first deployment, while others were young Marines who had benefited from his mentorship in recent years. Despite their different backgrounds and experiences, they all shared a common respect for the man they had come to honor.
Private First Class Danny Kim had managed to secure a spot with the delegation from his reconnaissance unit, despite his commanding officer's initial reluctance to spare personnel for what was essentially a ceremonial function. Kim's persistent requests and his obvious emotional connection to Rodriguez had finally convinced his superiors to approve his participation in the rally.
Kim carried with him a letter that had been signed by every member of his current unit, expressing their gratitude for Rodriguez's service and their respect for his actions during the convoy ambush. The letter had been Kim's idea, but his fellow Marines had enthusiastically supported the effort. Even Marines who had never met Rodriguez personally understood the significance of his sacrifice for Dr. Chen.
Corporal Maria Santos had traveled from her artillery unit with a delegation of 12 Marines, all of whom had served under Rodriguez's command at various points in their careers. Santos had been elected by her peers to serve as their spokesman, and she carried with her a ceremonial plaque that had been crafted by the unit's mechanics using materials salvaged from damaged equipment. The plaque was inscribed with Rodriguez's service record and a simple message: "To a Marine's Marine, from the Marines who learned what that means by serving under your command." Santos had practiced her presentation speech dozens of times during the journey to FOB Chapman, but she knew that when the moment came, her emotions would make it difficult to speak clearly.
Master Sergeant Robert Jackson had arrived with what was perhaps the most significant delegation of all. Jackson had coordinated with Marine units throughout the region to organize a formal presentation of colors that would honor both Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. 24 Marines carrying the flags of every unit that Rodriguez had served with would participate in the ceremony, creating a visual representation of his impact throughout the Marine Corps. Jackson had also brought with him a special gift for Dr. Chen.
The Marines from Rodriguez's original training company had pooled their resources to commission a custom medical bag inscribed with her name and the date of the convoy ambush.
The bag was crafted from the same materials used in military tactical gear, designed to withstand the rigors of combat medical work while honoring her courage under fire. The arrival of so many Marines had not gone unnoticed by the other personnel at FOB Chapman.
Soldiers from Army units stationed at the base had heard the story of the convoy ambush and had volunteered to help with the logistics of the rally. The joint service cooperation that had begun with Rodriguez's protection of Dr.
Chen was now extending to include hundreds of additional personnel. Navy personnel at the base medical facility had been particularly supportive of the effort to honor Dr. Avaloskimich. Chen, her fellow medical officers, understood better than anyone the courage required to provide treatment under combat conditions, and they were proud to see one of their own recognized for her exceptional service. Several Navy officers had requested permission to participate in the ceremony, creating a truly joint service event. Colonel Mitchell had initially been concerned about the security implications of concentrating so many personnel at FOB Chapman, but the increased Marine presence had actually enhanced the base's defensive capabilities. The additional security patrols and defensive positions established by the visiting Marines had created the most robust perimeter security the base had ever enjoyed. The ceremony planning had evolved into something far more elaborate than anyone had initially envisioned. What had started as a simple recognition event had grown into a formal military ceremony that would include presentations from multiple commands, a joint service honor guard, and addresses from senior officers who had traveled specifically to participate in the event. Brigadier General Patricia Williams, the regional Marine commander, had flown in from Kabul specifically to present Rodriguez with the Bronze Star Medal for his actions during the convoy ambush. The general's presence elevated the ceremony to the highest levels of military recognition and demonstrated the Marine Corps' commitment to honoring exceptional service.
Admiral James Burke, the Navy's regional medical commander, had similarly traveled to FOB Chapman to present Dr.
Chen with the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for her heroic actions during and after the ambush.
The Admiral's participation ensured that Dr.
Chen's contributions would receive the same level of recognition as Rodriguez's sacrifice. The ceremony had been scheduled for 1,400 hours to allow maximum participation from all the visiting units. The base's main parade ground had been prepared with reviewing stands and ceremonial decorations, creating a setting worthy of the occasion. Military photographers and public affairs officers were positioned to document the event for both official records and media distribution. Rodriguez had finally been informed about the true scope of the ceremony the evening before, when Dr. Chen could no longer keep the secret from him. His initial reaction had been one of embarrassment and discomfort with the attention, but Dr. Chen had helped him understand that the ceremony was not just about him.
It was about the values he represented and the impact his leadership had made on hundreds of fellow Marines. Marcus, these Marines didn't travel hundreds of miles just to see you. Dr. Suthers tested a record trail by second Saturday,
Chen had explained as they sat in the medical facility's recovery room. They came here because you showed them what it means to be a Marine. Your willingness to protect me during that ambush wasn't just an individual act of heroism.
It was a demonstration of everything they believe in. Rodriguez had struggled to accept that his actions warranted such recognition, but he gradually began to understand the broader significance of what was happening.
The Marines gathering at Fob Chapman were not just honoring him personally. They were celebrating the values and traditions that defined their service. His protection of Dr. Task just decided to take. Hey!
Chen had embodied those values in a moment of crisis, and the response demonstrated their enduring power. Chen had been similarly overwhelmed by the attention she was receiving, but her perspective was somewhat different from Rodriguez's. As a Navy officer serving alongside Marine units, she had always felt somewhat outside their traditional culture.
The fact that she was being honored alongside Rodriguez and that Navy leadership was participating in the ceremony represented a level of acceptance and recognition that she had never expected.
The morning of the ceremony began with individual unit formations as each Marine delegation prepared for their participation in the formal proceedings.
Sergeant Major Torres moved among the various groups, ensuring that everyone understood their roles and responsibilities. The complexity of coordinating so many different units would have challenged even the most experienced military planners, but Torres managed the process with calm efficiency.
Each unit had brought its own traditions and ceremonial elements to contribute to the overall event. Some carried unit flags and guidons that had been present at historic battles, while others brought ceremonial weapons and equipment that represented their specialized capabilities.
The diversity of the participating units created a rich tapestry of Marine Corps history and tradition. The base's dining facilities had been working around the clock to prepare a formal meal that would follow the ceremony. Military cooks from multiple services had volunteered their time and expertise to create a feast worthy of the occasion.
The menu included traditional military foods alongside regional specialties, reflecting the diverse backgrounds of the participating personnel.
Local Afghan officials had been invited to observe the ceremony as part of the base's ongoing efforts to maintain positive community relations.
The village elders who had originally requested the medical convoy that led to the ambush were particularly honored to attend.
Their presence served as a reminder of the humanitarian mission that had brought Rodriguez and Dr.
Chen together in the first place. As the ceremony time approached, Rodriguez was transported from the medical facility to the parade ground in a wheelchair, despite his protests that he was capable of walking.
Dr. Chen had insisted on the precaution, and her medical authority overruled his military pride. She walked beside the wheelchair, wearing her dress blue Navy uniform and carrying the ceremonial medical bag that would be presented to her during the ceremony. The sight of Rodriguez and Dr. Chizek says, "This is the book it's about history control. This is the book that Dr. Chizek's."
Chen arriving at the parade ground triggered a spontaneous reaction from the assembled Marines. Without any formal command or instruction, nearly 400 Marines snapped to attention in a gesture of respect that was both deeply moving and entirely voluntary.
The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of flags fluttering in the Afghan wind. Sergeant Major Torres called the formation to order and began the formal ceremony with the recitation of the events that had brought everyone together. His voice carried across the parade ground as he described the convoy ambush, Rodriguez's heroic protection of Dr. Chen, and her subsequent efforts to save his life. The assembled Marines listened in complete silence, many of them hearing the full details of the story for the first time. The first formal presentation came from Rodriguez's original training company, now represented by Marines who had completed their service and re-enlisted specifically to maintain their connection to the Corps. Their spokesman presented Rodriguez with a ceremonial sword that had been engraved with the names of every Marine who had served in their training platoon. The sword represented the brotherhood that had been forged during their initial military training and had endured throughout their subsequent careers.
So if...
Dr. Chen received a similar presentation from Navy medical personnel who had served alongside Marine units throughout their careers. The ceremonial stethoscope they presented was inscribed with the names of Navy medical personnel who had been killed or wounded while providing care to Marines in combat.
The gift honored her courage while acknowledging the sacrifices of those who had come before her.
Each participating unit had prepared its own presentation, creating a ceremony that lasted for over 2 hours but never felt lengthy or repetitive. The diversity of the gifts and tributes reflected the broad impact that Rodriguez had made throughout his career, while the consistent themes of sacrifice, service, and brotherhood created a unified narrative that resonated with everyone present. The formal medal presentations by General Williams and Admiral Burke served as the ceremony's climax. Both officers spoke about the significance of joint service cooperation and the importance of maintaining military values even in the most challenging circumstances. Their presence demonstrated the highest levels of military leadership's commitment to recognizing exceptional service. Rodriguez's acceptance speech was brief and focused entirely on deflecting credit to others. He thanked Dr. Sally Chen for saving his life, praised his fellow Marines for their courage during the ambush, and emphasized that his actions were simply what any Marine would have done in similar circumstances. His humility only enhanced the respect that the assembled Marines felt for him. Dr. Chen's remarks were similarly humble, but she took the opportunity to praise the Marines she had served alongside and to emphasize the importance of joint service cooperation. Her words resonated particularly strongly with the Navy personnel present, who understood the challenges of serving as medical personnel in combat environments. The ceremony concluded with a formal pass and review by all participating units. Each Marine delegation marched past the reviewing stand, where Rodriguez and Dr. Chen stood alongside the senior officers who had traveled to honor them. The precision and professionalism of the various units created a powerful demonstration of military excellence that served as a fitting tribute to the values that had inspired Rodriguez's heroic actions. As the formal ceremony ended and the participants began to disperse for the planned meal and informal gatherings, Rodriguez and Dr. Chen found themselves surrounded by Marines who wanted to express their personal gratitude and respect. The individual conversations that followed the formal presentations were perhaps even more meaningful than the ceremony itself, as they allowed for the personal connections that truly defined military service.
The impact of the ceremony extended far beyond Fob Chapman. Military photographers and public affairs officers had documented the entire event, and the story of Rodriguez's heroism and the Marine Corps' response was already being prepared for distribution to media outlets worldwide.
The ceremony would serve as a powerful example of military values and joint service cooperation that would inspire service members for years to come. But for Rodriguez and Dr. Chen, the most significant impact was the personal connections they had made with the hundreds of Marines who had traveled to honor them. The ceremony had demonstrated that their actions during the convoy ambush were part of a larger tradition of service and sacrifice that connected them to every Marine who had ever worn the uniform. The weeks following the ceremony at FOB Chapman brought profound changes to both Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Dr. Sarah Chen. The Bronze Star Medal and Navy and Marine Corps Medal they had received were more than just military decorations. They had become symbols of a story that resonated far beyond the boundaries of their respective services. Rodriguez's physical recovery progressed steadily under Dr. Chen's continued care. The shrapnel wounds had healed completely, leaving only small scars as reminders of that day when he had thrown himself between her and the grenade. But the emotional impact of the ceremony and the overwhelming response from his fellow Marines had affected him in ways he was still struggling to understand. Dr. Chen had returned to her regular duties at the base medical facility, but she found that her perspective on her service had fundamentally changed.
This is Backstone.
The recognition she had received from both Navy and Marine leadership had validated her decision to serve in combat zones, but more importantly, it had shown her the profound impact that medical personnel could have beyond their immediate patient care responsibilities. The story of the convoy ambush and the subsequent ceremony had spread throughout the military community with remarkable speed. Military publications featured detailed accounts of Rodriguez's heroism and Dr. Chen's courage under fire. The photographs from the ceremony, showing nearly 400 Marines gathered to honor their wounded comrade and the Navy nurse who had saved his life, became iconic images that captured the essence of military service and sacrifice. Colonel Mitchell received inquiries from military leaders throughout the world who wanted to understand how such an impressive display of military unity had been organized. The Rodriguez rally had demonstrated the power of informal military networks and the enduring strength of bonds forged through shared service. Military academies began incorporating the story into their leadership curricula, using it as an example of how individual actions could inspire collective responses. But the most significant long-term impact was felt by the Marines who had participated in the ceremony. Many of them returned to their units with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what military service meant.
The experience of gathering to honor Rodriguez and Dr. Chen had reinforced their commitment to the values that defined their profession.
Private First Class Danny Kim was among those most profoundly affected by the experience. The young Marine had struggled with confidence and direction before Rodriguez had taken him under his wing, and the ceremony had crystallized his understanding of the kind of Marine he wanted to become. He began applying for advanced training programs and leadership positions, determined to follow in his mentor's footsteps. Corporal Maria Santos found that her participation in the ceremony had elevated her status within her artillery unit.
Boys and granddaughters also found themselves.
Her fellow Marines had observed her leadership during the trip to FOB Chapman and had recognized her potential for greater responsibilities. She was selected for promotion to sergeant ahead of schedule and was assigned to train new Marines arriving at her unit. Master Sergeant Robert Jackson used his experience coordinating the ceremony as a foundation for developing new approaches to military ceremonies and recognition events. His detailed after-action report on the logistics of the Rodriguez rally became a template for other units seeking to organize similar events. Officer events. Jackson was eventually selected for assignment to the Marine Corps' ceremonial unit, where his expertise in managing complex military ceremonies proved invaluable. The ceremony had also strengthened relationships between different service branches. The joint Navy-Marine Corps nature of the event had demonstrated the importance of inter-service cooperation and had created lasting bonds between personnel from different military cultures. Navy medical personnel throughout the region reported improved working relationships with Marine units, partly as a result of the respect generated by Dr. Chen's recognition. Rodriguez himself struggled with the attention and recognition he continued to receive. Letters and messages from Marines around the world flooded the base mail system, all expressing gratitude for his service and admiration for his actions during the convoy ambush.
He found it difficult to accept that his split-second decision to protect Dr.
Chen had inspired such a significant response. Dr. Pekel said consistent response. Chen helped him process these feelings during their regular conversations in the medical facility. She understood his discomfort with the attention, but she also recognized the importance of accepting the recognition gracefully. The Marines who had written to him needed to believe that their values and traditions were embodied by real people, like Rodriguez, and his humble acceptance of their admiration was itself an important form of leadership. The village clinic that had been the original destination for the ambushed convoy had finally received the medical supplies and attention it needed. A follow-up mission, conducted with significantly enhanced security, had successfully delivered the supplies and established regular medical visits to the area. The local population had learned about Rodriguez's sacrifice to protect the Navy nurse, and their cooperation with coalition forces had increased as a result. The Taliban cell responsible for the original ambush had been tracked down and eliminated by a joint operation involving multiple coalition units. Intelligence gathered during the investigation had revealed the extent of the planning that had gone into the attack, confirming that Rodriguez's successful defense of the convoy had prevented a significant enemy success. The elimination of the cell had made the region safer for both military personnel and local civilians. Rodriguez's sister, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, had been promoted to major partly in recognition of her excellent work coordinating intelligence support for the ceremony and the subsequent operations against the Taliban cell. Her dual perspective as both an intelligence officer and Rodriguez's sister had given her unique insights into the broader implications of the convoy ambush and its aftermath.
The documentary film crew that had been granted access to FOB Chapman during the ceremony had produced a powerful short film about Rodriguez's heroism and the Marine Corps' response.
The film had been distributed to military audiences worldwide and had become a popular tool for recruitment and retention programs. Civilian audiences had also responded positively to the film, which had helped improve public understanding of military service and sacrifice.
Dr. Chen had been selected for assignment to the Naval Medical Center in San Diego upon completion of her deployment, where she would help train other Navy medical personnel preparing for combat assignments.
Her experiences during the convoy ambush and her subsequent service alongside Marine units had given her unique expertise in combat medicine and joint service operations. Rodriguez had been offered several different assignment options, including positions at Marine Corps headquarters and prestigious recruiting assignments. After careful consideration, he had chosen to remain in Afghanistan for an extended deployment, serving as a mentor and trainer for newly arrived Marines. His decision surprised some observers, but those who knew him best understood his commitment to serving where he could have the greatest impact on young Marines. The medical facility at FOB Chapman had been upgraded and expanded, partly as a result of the attention generated by the ceremony. Additional resources and personnel had been allocated to improve medical capabilities throughout the region. benefiting both military personnel and local civilians.
Dr. Chen's heroic service had highlighted the importance of combat medical capabilities and had influenced resource allocation decisions at the highest levels of military command.
The informal network of Marines that had coordinated the Rodriguez rally had evolved into a more formal support organization for wounded Marines and their families. The success of their effort to honor Rodriguez had demonstrated the power of grassroots military organizing, and they had applied the same principles to support other Marines facing challenges or crises. Sergeant Major Torres had been selected for assignment to Marine Corps headquarters, where his experience managing the ceremony logistics had qualified him for a position in ceremonial operations. His new role would involve coordinating military ceremonies and recognition events at the national level, applying the lessons learned from the Rodriguez rally to honor other exceptional service members. The story of Rodriguez and Dr. Taxis's Episcopal Chen had become part of military folklore, told and retold in barracks and mess halls throughout the world. But the impact extended beyond simple storytelling. Their example had influenced military training programs, leadership development curricula, and service policies related to joint operations and medical support. Years later, when Rodriguez had completed his military service and returned to civilian life, he would still receive letters from Marines whose lives had been touched by his example.
Many of these Marines had never met him personally, but they understood that his willingness to throw himself between Dr.
Chen and that grenade represented something larger than individual heroism.
It embodied the values that defined military service and the bonds that connected service members across time and space.
Dr. Chen had continued her naval career, eventually becoming one of the Navy's most experienced combat medical officers. She had served in multiple deployments and had trained hundreds of other medical personnel for combat assignments. Her expertise, gained through her experiences with Rodriguez and the Marines, had saved countless lives and had advanced the field of combat medicine in significant ways. The convoy ambush that had brought them together had lasted only minutes, but its impact had extended across years and had touched thousands of lives. Rodriguez's split-second decision to protect Dr. Chen had created ripple effects that continued to influence military culture and operations long after their wounds had healed and their deployments had ended.
The village clinic that had been their original destination had become a symbol of successful civilian-military cooperation, providing medical care to local populations while maintaining security for coalition forces.
The supplies that Dr. Chen had carried in her medical bag during the ambush had eventually reached their intended recipients, fulfilling the humanitarian mission that had motivated their dangerous journey. The Taliban fighters who had planned and executed the ambush could never have anticipated the response their attack would generate.
Their attempt to disrupt coalition medical efforts had instead inspired a demonstration of military unity and determination that had strengthened rather than weakened coalition resolve. The story of Rodriguez and Dr.
Chen had become a powerful counter-narrative to enemy propaganda, showing the world the true character of American military personnel. In the end, the most lasting impact of their story was not found in the medals they received or the ceremonies held in their honor. It was found in the countless individual decisions made by Marines and sailors who had been inspired by their example to serve with greater courage, dedication, and selflessness. The grenade that Rodriguez had shielded Dr. Salpeque, Chen had created more than just physical wounds. It had revealed the unbreakable bonds that connected service members to each other and to the values that defined their profession. The phrase "get low" that Rodriguez had shouted as he threw himself over Dr. Chen had become a rallying cry among the Marines who had participated in the ceremony. But they understood that the true meaning of those words extended beyond the immediate tactical situation. They represented a willingness to subordinate personal safety to the protection of others, a commitment to service that transcended individual survival. Rodriguez and Dr. Chen had shown the world what it meant to serve with honor, courage, and commitment. Their story had inspired a battalion of Marines to travel hundreds of miles to show their respect, but more importantly, it had inspired thousands of others to serve with the same dedication and selflessness. The convoy ambush had ended within hours, but the example they had set would continue to influence military service for generations to come.